funded by USAID. SHARE is USAID's Center for Education's principal mechanism for doing primary research related to education. As I mentioned, my name is Tom, and I am with the University of Notre Dame within its Pulte Institute for Global Development. And the University of Notre Dame houses, it is the prime and leads the SHARE mechanism. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Andrea McMurdy-Brummer, who is our Associate Director on SHARE as well. In the interest of time, thanks for those of you who have already started to introduce yourselves in the chat box. We ask you to please continue to do that. As you can see, we are recording this webcast and it will be staged on our website for others to access. If you would like to revisit this at any point, feel free to access our website and or circulate as well. Who you think might be interested in knowing more about SHARE's small grant mechanism. I'll also, just to confirm that everyone's in the right webcast, today is for organizations who would be applying as a locally registered organization who may or may not have funding coming from USAID at the moment, but we are specifically looking for applicants from organizations who are registered in one of the countries that USAID works for, in one of the low or middle income countries. So we're excited to have you on the call today. We'll start today with an overview of SHARE, then go into a little bit about the learning agendas that we support and how we arrived at specific learning questions that we would be targeting through this small grants mechanism. Then we'll share some details related to the grant itself, looking at areas of just over an overall summary, eligibility, some of the other aspects that organizations might be interested in knowing as they apply, as well as the application process and timelines. We hope to reserve as much time as at least 30 minutes at the end of the call, which we expect to last for an hour, but to be able to answer any questions that you may have. And if you do have questions, we invite you to go ahead and include them in the chat box as well, and that way you can also address them once the question and answer session starts up then too. So as a little bit of background on SHARE, SHARE's primary goal is to advance USAID's learning priorities in the global education sector, and principally also to really try to build a culture of evidence-based decision-making within the education sector. It does this through three outcomes. The first, which is to carry out targeted research to advance USAID's education sector learning priorities. And so we do primary research around that capacity. The second outcome speaks to how we do that. We really focus on building or engaging that community of organizations and actors who contribute to what we call this evidence ecosystem. So really speaking to those who both generate, translate, and ultimately use the evidence to support and assist with decision-making, either those on the policy side or the practice side. And so we really look to involve this larger ecosystem throughout the research process, including during research design, development of the research questions, throughout the research process in terms of reviewing tools and processes, and then helping to validate findings. For the third outcome under SHARE, we provide technical assistance to specific USAID missions and bureaus to support their country-specific priorities through buy-in services. Our work centers on USAID's 4 education learning agendas, which you can see presented here. The first is the Foundational Skills Development Learning Agenda. The next one is their Youth Workforce Development Learning Agenda. They also have a Higher Education Learning Agenda that we assist with, and then also their Education in Crisis and Conflict Learning Agenda. SHARE was involved in revising this year both the Foundational Skills Development Learning Agenda and the Education Crisis and Conflict Learning Agenda. So you may not find the most current versions of those just yet because they are in the process of still being approved by USAID. But we do have priority questions that have been identified through that process, which is what we present to you today. So these are the questions, or those learning areas rather, that we expect applications to focus on within the small grant mechanism. Excuse me. So the first 2 questions are from the Foundational Skills Development Learning Agenda. First states, what in-service educator professional development modalities cost effectively and sustainably improve educator performance and student learning outcomes, including for children with disability? What combination of modalities and approaches lead to these outcomes? The second learning area is, what are effective approaches and tools for identifying and supporting the access, inclusion, and learning of all children and youth, particularly those from marginalized groups? The next 2 questions originate from the Education and Crisis and Conflict Learning agendas. The first states, what are effective approaches and tools for identifying and supporting the access, inclusion, and learning of all children and youth, particularly those from marginalized groups? The second question states, what works to promote whole learner well-being for learners from different demographic groups? And what initiatives advance children's socio-emotional learning? And what is the relationship between socio-emotional learning and academic outcomes? The next set of questions come from our higher education learning agenda. First states, how can the viability and effectiveness of online and other forms of distance education be improved? And the second question is, how can higher education access, retention, and completion rates be improved for underrepresented populations, such as women, indigenous and marginalized populations, and people with disabilities? And the final question that we've noted as a priority for the small grants mechanism comes from the Youth Workforce Development Learning Agenda, and states, how does dosage and modality of soft skills training affect skills acquisition and employment outcomes? Are less costly scalable forms of soft skills support comparably effective to intensive forms of support? These are learning areas as a whole. So as you can see that they're, and you might be able to notice, they can be fairly general. And so research questions may be even more specific and may not tackle all aspects of the sub-questions within these, but should be helping to gain an increased understanding of these learning areas. So all that to say, you can fit a number of different, more specific and precise research questions under any of these learning areas. The reason why we're asking to align this research with existing education projects that are being implemented at the moment is because we really want to learn more about how to improve the implementation approaches, or what aspects of implementation can be focused on and improved upon, so that we can test the concept overall, or apart from the concept rather. So we call this implementation research. And so we're really trying to understand not just how effective an intervention really is. Actually, intervention, the effectiveness, for the most part, we hope that we already have an understanding of that already, but really under what contexts they're effective or not effective, and for which populations. And so, which, as well as how these can be scaled up over time. So we look at specifically three areas of implementation research that we expect to focus on. The first is context. And so understanding the feasibility of the interventions and when and under what contexts they may be appropriate. Then considering stakeholders and which stakeholders accept the interventions or don't accept them, and also speaking to their adoption of these interventions, and then looking at intervention delivery, addressing questions related to fidelity, delivery modalities, cost, and equity. And with that, I will pass it over to my colleague, Andrea, to go over the specific details related to the grant.
Thanks, Tom. So as Tom mentioned, today is our webcast on our Track 2 small grant mechanism. So for organizations and implementers that are registered in lower and middle income countries and are associated with current education interventions. The fund size for this Track 2 is $600,000, and we anticipate making up to 4 grants, each valued up to 150,000 US dollars under this track of the small grants mechanism. The application is currently open, and the deadline for this application is July 22nd, 2024, 5 p.m. US Standard Time, Eastern Standard Time. We are looking at global interventions, any countries where USAID is currently operating, and we expect the track of these implementation research projects to last anywhere from 8 to 12 months. The award will provide both financial and technical support through these grants. The objectives of the small grant mechanism are to fund and support more evidence generation and use for both the improvement and scaling of education projects globally in line with USAID's learning agendas, which Tom has shared. We want to understand more about more than just what works, but exploring the for whom, in what context, how, and at what cost these interventions are working globally. And we really want to contribute to changing practice for evidence-based continuous improvement in global education. So as Tom said, not just what is working, but how we can continue to improve upon the implementation of these education interventions. So who can apply for these Track 2 small grants? These grants are to be issued to education projects being implemented by either research institutes or non-governmental organizations that are registered within the countries where they are working. And we are looking for education interventions that have the potential to generate and use evidence to learn about their interventions and adapt and improve upon their current implementation approaches. And so in order for that to be the case, what we're looking for are projects that are implementing an evidence-based model. Even though they may not yet have evidence in their particular context or about their specific implementation, we're looking for education interventions that are evidence-based. So that we know the implementation approach has been proven, but we want to learn more about the specific context of the current intervention. We're also looking for education projects that are integrating into their local education evidence ecosystem. So involving stakeholders in the local community who are generating, translating, and ultimately using research for decision-making. And we're looking for education projects that are actively engaged in communities of practice that are working in the area of study. So such as governments, donors, or other bilateral organizations, and practitioner organizations that can help to inform the research design, and facilitate uptake of the learnings more broadly. And lastly, we're looking for education projects that are considering scaling up or planning for government uptake within the local host government. The eligibility criterion for the Track 2 small grants are proposed research focuses on improving an ongoing education intervention, and that are centered around these prioritized USAID learning areas, which Tom noted and which are noted in the RFA. We understand that many interventions may address multiple of the learning questions, and there may be multiple projects within an intervention, but we ask that you please limit your application to one project per submission and one learning question per submission. Secondly, the entity leading the intervention and the entity leading the implementation research must be legally registered locally within the country of implementation. The education intervention needs to be at a place in its timeline where it is still possible to adapt the intervention based on the findings of the research. So it's very important that when you're considering your application, consider where in the intervention, in the timeline intervention you are currently, and that you're not coming to the end of an implementation period, that there is still time that findings can be taken up and implementation can be adapted based on the findings of this research. And lastly, the proposed project will run for 8 to 12 months, so taking that into consideration as you consider your time. The details of the grant are, as I mentioned, up to $150,000 US per award, and will include right fit technical assistance from SHARE to the implementing and research organizations over an 8 to 12 month period. These grants will be applied to assist with learning needs raised by the locally based education implementers, and will be related to key implementation factors such as perception of key actors, intervention reform and reform of delivery modalities, and lastly, context in line with priorities cited within the USAID learning agenda questions, which have been prioritized. In addition to this financial support, the implementing organization and research organization will benefit from right fit technical assistance. This will be determined on a case-by-case basis with the receiving organization and can include, but not limited to, help with investigating issues and co-creation of a research design to test different options, a light touch support of the internal research team from the applying organization, and lastly, potentially the application of SHARE's ecosystem engagement approach, which, as Tom mentioned, as one of our primary objectives of SHARE, and again, an objective of the small grant mechanism, is to really engage with the local education ecosystem to increase the chances of uptake of the results of this implementation research. Another key component of this Track 2 small grants mechanism, and a key component of SHARE overall, is a capacity exchange component. We understand that oftentimes it is among different grantees and different research organizations that the most learning can take place. And so we want to make sure that we're focused on this interpersonal dimension and making opportunities available to the grantees of Track 2 to learn from each other. This will come in the form of virtual convenings to connect and deepen knowledge, to learn from each other's implementation of and design of the research. This will take place in terms of team coaching and assistance with implementation research, and how to continue generating a culture of learning and adaptation within each organization. And it will include access to communication experts within SHARE to review draft deliverables and suggest improvements for the outputs of this research. This will mean that applicants will need, or awardees will need, to build time into their timeline in order to participate and contribute to research capacity exchange activities that may benefit other SHARE network organizations, and also participating in the strengthening of the evidence ecosystems and organizational performance within their local organization and context. This will include the completion of an initial capacity assessment baseline assessment upon acceptance of a grant, and an end-line assessment upon completion of the grant. And this will also include the identification of progress markers at the start of the grant that will serve as indicators to show progress towards organizational strengthening as well as system strengthening within the local ecosystem. The application process for track 2 is first, stage 1, a submission of the application form. This application form can be found on the website that was linked in this call for request for applications, and it is requested as a submission of a 2-page application, which can be found in Annex 1 of the RFA. We also are requesting a summary budget, a work plan, and a summary budget narrative. We will request a current monitoring and evaluation plan of the intervention under study and a work plan for that intervention as well. The applications for track 2 are due at 5 p.m. United States Eastern Time on July 22nd, 2024. Stage 2 of the application process will be a co-creation process. Those applicants that pass the initial screening will be shortlisted for a 90-minute co-creation call with the SHARE team. And this call will be used to discuss the application and for the applicant to respond to any clarifying questions aligned with the evaluation criterion. And these evaluation criterion can be found also within the request for application. And then finally, stage 3 is the final determination. From those applicants that are moved forward into the co-creation process, up to 4 applicants will be selected for grant recipients. And they will be chosen both on feedback from the co-creation process and as well as balancing the studies across the different USAID learning areas and taking into consideration if there are any opportunities for these grant recipients to coordinate with other similar ongoing research that may allow for more robust studies that may be able to combine different studies focusing on similar learning areas to produce more robust evidence in advancement of those learning agenda questions. And then lastly is just an outline of the project timeline. So as mentioned, the application submission deadline is July 22nd. Between July 23rd and August 14th, these applications will be reviewed and an initial shortlist will be generated for invitation to the co-creation process. These 90-minute co-creation calls will take place between August 21st and August 23rd. And then final portfolio selection will be made by August 27th of this year. And with that, I will turn back to Tom. I know I've seen some comments coming in the chat, and so I believe we probably have some questions there, but also to open up to a question and answer period.
Great. So some of you will see that there are questions that, as Andrea mentioned, within the chat box already. There was a question from Brian saying, what types of evidence are applicants expected to share to show that the intervention has already been backed by evidence? And in response to that, a good question, Brian, we would prefer that you reference quickly and briefly secondary literature or potentially other activities that you may be aware of that feature a specific intervention where it has been successful. Similarly, there was another question from David at Builda. If leading organizations can support their research efforts with external partners, so subcontract them for areas such as data collection and analysis. And the answer to that is yes. If you would like to subcontract another organization to assist, excuse me, with aspects of the research that is allowed, you would just need to fall within the allowable budget ceiling.
Webpage imene imooneka ngati tenchani kungobweretsa no ngati ungopanga click track 1 simujanadika ngati track 2 ka whatever.
we also ask that with regards to this question about external partners, we are actually encouraging organizations to work together with higher education institutions, either research institutes, either research institutes or higher education institutions to assist in the research if you're able to fit that within your proposal and the budget. There was also a question from Resiana, which asked if we need to select a specific region or province if you're currently operating in multiple regions or provinces within a country. And the answer to that is that you can select the specific geographic range provided that you can fit it within the budget. And we can also talk through this and through possible options, especially if there's an opportunity to have a really nice experiment across different regions. Then that's something we could possibly revisit during if you're selected for the co-creation round. And then after that, if you pass that, then during the grant negotiations round. There's also a question from Bernard Mudogo. How many researchers can submit a proposal? And if we have a sample budget template? So good question. In terms of the researchers, we would ask that just one application per project. So you could fit a number of research questions into that application if you want, and to show how they could be connected. But if there's another but again, just one application per research project. If you have another project that you work on that would also align with one or more of the learning areas that we're targeting through this small grants mechanism, you're more than welcome to submit multiple applications. And yes, there is a budget template. You can find that on our website, where the call is made available as well. And we'll put a link to that website, and you'll find there a template both for the budget, a budget narrative, and also a work plan, which would need to accompany your application. The application itself, the application narrative. The application narrative, we're asking it to be very short, very concise, no more than 2 pages. We want to understand the concept that you're putting forward and see how you're able to communicate that within a 2-page maximum limit. So we're hoping to make this a simple application process with those pieces. And then we also ask that you submit a current activity monitoring, evaluation, and learning plan and work plan for the intervention under study. So the intervention that you would be trying to study. So see, there are a couple more questions. And I'll take these as they come. So Jorgelina, can an international organization such as IIEP UNESCO apply to the grant in joint work with a research institute, for instance? And the answer to that is no, you could not apply for this grant. We have another grant mechanism that's targeted at organizations that are not locally registered organizations, but are reserved for USAID funded applications. However, you are more than welcome to work with a local research institute, and they would be the leads on this. So you could potentially be a sub to them, but the local research institute would need to take the lead on this opportunity. So Steve asks, there's a limit of 1 learning question per intervention. And the answer to that is no. We would ask you to, just for the purposes of the research, potentially try to focus as much as possible. But if you see an opportunity for learning across different learning areas and learning questions within one intervention and in one activity, then you're welcome to communicate that within the application. And then we can revisit that if you're selected to advance to the co-creation round as well. A question from Yolande. Can a consortium of 2 or 3 NGOs apply together? The answer is you're welcome to work together. There would have to be a lead organization. And so one organization that ultimately is the go-between between the University of Notre Dame and the research consortium is welcome. But if you would like to bring on other organizations to assist with the research, you're more than welcome to do that. You would just need to, that one application would need to fall within the budget ceiling of $150,000.
Thank you.
No problem. And I see Andrea also responded to Steve's question. I see Valerie. We would like clarity on the track 1 versus track 2. We are a sub-partner for 2 USAID activities and are registered in country as well. Since we are not a prime for USAID, we believe we may be track 2, but want to confirm. And Valerie, that's correct. If you are registered in a low or middle income country, even if you are on a USAID activity as a sub, you are eligible to apply for this track 2 research mechanism, or for track 2 of this research mechanism. David Adbilda, I understand that for some USAID funds, awardees access the USAID network. What does the network entail? Not sure I understand the question, David. So feel free to come off of mute and explain further if that would be helpful. But I would just say that we would, for the track 2 partners, we're hoping to make available opportunities for cross-learning. Those would be through webinars or joint meetings of organizations that would be facilitated and organized by the University of Notre Dame during the small grant period. So if that makes sense. Great. Thank you. And we have a question from Puri Bun. Welcome, Puri. Regarding evidence of the intervention to be studied, must it have rich evidence from the local or international evidence of similar intervention work just fine? So again, good question, Corey. It can either be international or local. We just would like to have the implementation research should be looking at interventions that have been proven to be effective in some context. So we're not necessarily doing an effectiveness study, which could require probably a more rigorous, maybe impact evaluation to see what context it worked, or to see if it actually does work in some context. But the implementation research aspect then would allow you to focus under what contexts it actually would be working and with which populations. We have a question. Great, thanks, Puri. We have a question from Isabella, which I think Andrea already responded to which email address or through which channel can we send questions if we have doubts during the proposal construction process? And I see that Andrea already responded to you. You can send applications to share@nd.edu. If there are questions that come through the application process, we will try to issue out an announcement to all organizations who might be interested in this with frequent updates to our website. So we do encourage you to continue to visit our website where we are hosting the application materials. Andrea, could I ask you to put that website URL in the chat box if you have it? If not, I can also do it.
Yes, I will do that right now.
Great, thank you. Those are all the questions that I'm seeing in the chat box. Are there any questions that I may have missed? Any other questions that people have? Okay. Well, we're excited that you all joined us today. We're excited to receive and review your applications. Thanks very much for your questions today and for your interest in this mechanism. We're trying to make the application process as easy as possible, and for that reason, not having a long narrative. But we do appreciate that it will require some level of effort on your parts, and thanks in advance to all of you. And yeah, we look forward to receiving your applications by July 22nd, and best of luck. We will again host this webcast will be placed on our website, which Andrea just shared the URL, and you can feel free to circulate both the application and the request for applications and our website to others who you think might be interested, and that would be appreciated. Thanks again. Oh, one final question that came up: if we expect a research paper to be generated at the end of the project, or just a presentation of the findings. For the purposes of this research effort, we would be asking for a brief research memo that communicates findings. If you would like to generate a research paper coming off of the study at some point, you're more than welcome to. Those would not be funded through this grant, but we could certainly work with you apart from this grant to do that at a later date. Great. Excellent. Thank you, Techie. Thanks to all. Have a wonderful day. Oh, one more question for you. Go ahead. Explaining a bit more about the co-creation process. Sure. So that will be an opportunity for us to meet with shortlisted partners based on the initial applications that you submit. We would reserve that to a 90-minute call with shortlisted and then potential applicants, where you would be able to expand on aspects of your application. Upon reviewing your application, we may have more specific and targeted questions that we would ask you to speak to. So it could take a number of features, but and during that time, we can also help to identify other ways to either refocus or improve or adapt your proposed research study within, again, the parameters of the budget itself. And so mostly it would be an opportunity to answer and address any specific questions that emerge coming off of the first stage of the application process. Okay. And then I see another question. Do you expect us to give a more detailed presentation at that time of the proposal. Entering that process does not mean we are rewarded yet, correct? That's true. So the co-creation process does not mean that you will definitely receive an award at that point. We would be asking you to speak to specific questions that we would identify based on your initial application. Yes, so there would be some kind of a presentation. It doesn't necessarily mean that you would have to generate anything in addition, but just be prepared to speak to questions that we would be responding and sending in advance to you related to your application. Great. Thanks, Corey. Andrea and I will continue to stay on for anyone else who may be interested and have more questions, but feel free to drop off at any point also. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Yolande, we will post the recording of this presentation of the webcast on the call for applications website.
Okay.
Sorry, Andrea, is it okay for me to unmute and ask? Sorry,
Sure.
our team the timing and so
Go
is it
ahead.
okay for okay, all right. I'm having question on the application template. Because in section 2 of the application, especially regarding the research question, proposed research design, it's the detail of that section seems like how finding from this study will help your project to improve. And on the adaptation plan, it's also saying something like detail how you plan to apply the learning from the study to improve your interventions. So I'm not by your intervention here. I just want to clarify whether that intervention, must it be the intervention that our organization implement, or it can be some other interventions that it's not our organization implement, but we think or we feel like, or from the discussion or from our work, we seen that the interventions from the other organization is worth study more and for scale up or something.
So yeah, so Pori, to that question, that's why this research does need to be paired with an ongoing intervention, so that the questions can be specific to that intervention and then adapted during that intervention time period. So unfortunately, it's we're not looking for applications that would be looking at interventions kind of in theory. We're looking for real kind of practical and ongoing interventions. So but those interventions could be implemented by you, or they could be implemented by another organization, but then you would need to work with that organization to make sure that the learning from this study can
Will improve
be
that
used.
the
Yes,
intervention. I see, I see.
exactly.
Mm. But for that proposal, is there any requirement for us to have the endorsement from the organization that is implementing that interventions to work with us in order to submit that proposal, or it's not that necessary for now?
I would say it would be important to work with that organization as you're developing the application. Just again, even for the purposes of defining an adaptation plan to make sure that there is enough time within their implementation period to be able to adapt the intervention, and also that this would be something that they would be interested and willing to do. So we're not necessarily asking for a letter of support, although a letter of support could be useful in this case, but just certainly some indication within the application that acknowledges that you have been collaborating, communicating with them, and to the point where they would need to be able to share their current activity monitoring, evaluation, and learning plan, as well as the current activity timeline or work plan uh, that would show how much time and at what stage the intervention, the activity is in at the moment.
I see. Just one more question, because the right now, of course, before there's a lot of interventions from development partners rather than government initiated. But there's a trend now in Cambodia that the government try to pilot their own intervention. But of course, it's not those piloting intervention is not yet scale up nationwide. So I'm wondering whether the intervention to be started only, limited to NGO or other organization beside government, or we can also work with the intervention implemented or piloted by the government.
Right. Great question. This is not limited. So you can very absolutely present a government intervention and be working with the government to apply this study. So that's absolutely fine.
Just one more, very last one.
Mhm.
If we're going to really need to help, let's say the government, the piloting intervention from the government is quite promising, but they having some difficulty in terms of scaling up, or have not enough evidence in terms of scaling up, but somehow to engage with the government. I'm not sure whether in terms of having them as an advisor, and basically the direct question would be, do SARE have any limitation that the project should not fund the government stuff or something like this, just in case in terms of budgeting?
Right. Yes. If you would like to bring somebody on from the government as an advisor, that would be an allowable cost. If they're contributing meaningfully to the study, then that would be fine. And we may ask that be articulated clearly within your application. There are some countries where this would not be allowed. I don't think Cambodia is one of those countries, but there are some OFAC countries where there are restrictions that U.S. government resources cannot be channeled to government representatives. So we would just have to look at that on a case-by-case basis.
I see. Okay, I think that's it from me. Thank you so much, Tom.
Great, no problem. Thank you. Thank you, Christoph. Right.
Just one last confirmation. I
Sure.
as I read through my note. I think in the annex on section 3, the last point, I just want to confirm in the annex, we also need to submit the existing project or activity work plan for the project to be studied. Is that what you mentioned earlier, that we need to work with the organizations that is implementing the intervention? So seems like it's a must to have them on board with us to actually even co-design this implementation, and also having M&Es and how clear outputs and how this project actually can contribute to the intervention.
Exactly. Yes.
But now there would be plan. One, it's for the projects that let's say my organization is applying, and another one is a separate work plan, but with the organization that we're going to study their intervention.
So we would be asking for two work plans. One is a work plan where a template has been provided that shows how you expect to carry out the research and the timing of the research itself. But the other one is the work plan from the activity or the activity that speaks to the intervention itself that you would be studying. And so there may be different work plans within that activity, but we would want to see specifically the one related to the intervention, understudy within that activity, so that we can assess if there is still time to incorporate the learning from this study into that intervention to be able to adapt and learn and adapt, I should say.
But that fourth work plan, must it be the same period as the project, or it can be, because the project is like 8 to 12 months. So the work plan, the second work plan, must it be designed for that period too, or sometime after? I'm not sure on that.
Yes, it would need to fall within that time period. There may be opportunities to extend the 12 months, and we could discuss that more during the co-creation period and then also during the grant negotiations.
Because I'm afraid, because the study, let's say, it might take some time to write up the analysis and findings, and it might almost at the end of the project, and then to use or utilize that finding, it might occur sometime almost at the end of the project. So just want to see.
Right. And we're not asking that the adaptation itself be completed within that time frame. So meaning that it could be a phased adaptation, and then there would be learning to gain from that adaptation period as well. That may not all fit within this 8 to 12-month window. We can appreciate that. But there should still be at least an opportunity to take some learning from the study and integrate it into the current intervention at some point within that 8 to 12-month period, or potentially a little after that.
Need to incorporate in the M&E to monitor after the study.
Exactly. Yep.
Thank you.
Great.
And Tori, I just wanted to clarify, I just want to make sure this was clear. We are not expecting the applicant for the small grant to develop a work plan for the intervention. This should be a work plan that already exists for the intervention.
Work plan that already exists.
So, for example, if you're studying a teacher professional development intervention, we're asking for a copy of the work plan for that intervention. It's not something that you as the applicant for the research grant would need to develop. It's just something that you would request from the implementing organization.
I see. But what if it's confidential?
Well, I would imagine that, I guess because you're considering a government intervention, it would be potentially something that is not shared. Because if it's something that's funded by an external donor, it's a public document. So then in that case, you would need to work with them to provide a timeline or some sort of documentation that shows the timeline of the intervention and where your study would fit into that timeline.
I see. So now let's say that intervention is 5 year longs, but we need to discuss with them which, let's say, if the small grant project will implement next year, we need to see how this small grant study will fit into the 5 years plan. So we don't have to request them for the 5 years work plans, but just a specific year that our study might be useful for that intervention. I see.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Good to be on a call with you
Thank you so much,
today.
Andrea and Tom.
No problem.
I'll see
Thank you
you
for
tomorrow.
Right.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.